Welcome back to Python tutorials for complete beginners, from boring people. In earlier videos, we covered the basic elements of Python syntax. We talked about how to define functions, how to make your computer act differently, based on conditionals, and how to make it perform operations repeatedly, using while and for loops. Now that we have the basics of syntax out of the way, we can start growing our Python knowledge with more data types, which can also be called as data structures. Previously, we get to know some data types in Python, including numeric data types, like integer or float, and other types like Boolean and string. In the upcoming videos, we will do a deep dive into strings, lists, and dictionaries. Heads up, while we have used strings and list in our scripts already, we barely scratched the surface of all the things we can do with them. Dictionaries are a whole new data type for us to dig into as well. We're going to use them to write all kinds of scripts in Python. So, let's spend some time to get to know these data types, when to use them, and how to make the most out of them. Before that, appreciate your thumbs up to support the channel. By now, we've used strings in a lot of examples. Before we dive into the details of string, let's go over what we have seen so far, and add a few more points. First, a string is a data type in Python, which is used to represent a piece of text. It is written between quotes, either double quotes, or single quotes, as long as they match. If we mix up double and single quotes, Python will return a syntax error, telling us it could not find the end of the string. A string can be as short as 0 characters. This usually called an empty string. Or, a string can be long. We also learned that we can use strings to build longer strings, using the plus sign. This action is called string concatenation. What about dealing with quotes inside your string? Remember to avoid using similar quotes. If the quote we use inside the string matches with the quotes we use to cover the string, we will get an error, because the computer does not know what the end point of the string is. Another way is to put the backslash right before the quotes inside the string, to escape any special characters. A less common operation is to multiply the string by a number, which multiplies the content of the string many times. If we want to know how long a string is, we can use the len function, which we saw in earlier videos. The len function tells us the number of characters contained in the string. We can use strings to represent a lot of different things. They can hold a username, a password, an email address, the name of a file, and any other text. A lot of the data that we interact with will be stored in strings. That's why it's important to know how to use string. There are tons of things we could do with strings in our scripts. For example, we can create a list of emails by checking out the users of our system and concatenating our email domain. Or we can check if files are named a certain way by looking at the file name and seeing if they match our criteria. You can probably think of more examples where your code needs to handle strings. But to use strings effectively, we need to know what methods are available to us. We'll cover some of the operations we can perform over strings, including how to access parts of them and modify them. Now, let's see how we can access a specific character, or a slice of character, within a string. This technique is useful, in case we have a text that is too long to display, and we want to show just a portion of it. We can do that through an operation called string indexing. This operation lets us access the character in a given position or index, using square brackets, and the number of the position we want. Notice what is happening here is that Python starts counting indexes from 0, not 1. Just like it does with the range function. So if we want the first character, we need to access the one at index 0. Knowing that indexes start at 0, which one do you think will be the last index in the string? It'll always be one less than the length of the string. In this case, our string has 4 characters, so the last index will be 3. We see that the character in position 3 is the last character of the string. And if we try to access index 4, we get an index error, telling us that it is out of range. We can only go up to the length of the string, -1. What if you want to print the last character of a string, but you don't know how long it is? You can do that using negative indexes. In this example, we don't know the length of the string, but it doesn't matter. Using negative indexes lets us access the positions in the string, starting from the last. On top of accessing individual characters, we can also access a slice of a string. A slice is the portion of a string that can contain more than one character. Also sometimes called substring. We do that by creating a range using a colon as a separator. The range we use, when accessing a slice of a string, works just like the range function. It includes the first number, but goes up to one less than the last number. In this case, we start with index 0, the first letter of the string, and go up to index 7, the eighth letter of the string. Similar to that, check out two more examples. Another option for the range is to include only one of the two indexes. If we leave the first value empty, it's assumed that the index is the first value. Accessing the slice from nothing to 8 takes the first 8 characters of the string, indexes 0 to 7. If we leave the second value empty, it's assumed that the index is the last value, which is also the length of the string. Accessing the slice from 15 to nothing takes everything from index 15 onward. Finally, as string indexing works like the range function, we can add in a third number to indicate the step. Let's try it out. You can see that the first line of code print all characters from the first character to the eighth character with the interval of 2. The next two examples work the same way. Last up, notice this way of indexing will result in the original string because it accessed the string from the first to the end. If we want to reverse the string, we can tell our string to step back by adding -1 as the third number. All of this indexing might seem confusing at first. Don't worry, we all took time to wrap our heads around it. The key is to keep practicing until you master it. Now that we know how to select, slice, and access the parts of the string we want, next up, we are going to learn how to modify them. Imagine, you have a string with a character that is wrong, and you want to fix it, like this one. Taking into account what you learned about string indexing, you might be tempted to fix it by accessing the corresponding index and changing the character. Let's access the wrong letter by its index. Then replace that wrong letter with a correct one, by assigning the correct value to the wrong letter. In this case, we're told that strings don't support item assignment. This means that we can't change individual characters because strings in Python are immutable, which is another way to say, the string cannot be modified. What we can do, is create a new string based on the old one, like this. We just fixed the typo. But when we said, string cannot be modified, does that mean the variable with a string value can never be changed? Not really. We can change it by assigning a new value to the same variable. Let's do that a couple of times to see how it works. What we're doing here, is giving the message variable a whole new value. We're not changing the underlying string that was assigned to it before. We're assigning a whole new string with different content. If this seems a bit complex, that's okay. We will revisit this concept again once we come across the future problem. We just found out how to create a new message from the old one. But, did you notice that, we need to manually count the index of the character we wanted to change? What if I asked you to search for the letter Z in this paragraph? You definitely don't want to manually count the index in this situation. This is where the string method comes in handy. Let's get to know a new concept, called method. Methods give us access to a lot of useful functionality of a specific data type. You can think of method as function. The difference is that a method is a function that applies to an object only. Take the index method as an example. Index method is a string method, which means that index method is a function that tie to the string object only. If you plan to use a string method to an integer, you will encounter this error, telling you that index is a method that is not applicable for integer objects. To recap, don't worry if all this sounds confusing. For now, what you need to remember is that method is a function that applies to an object, and string method is a function that applies to the string object. For your information, Python has a set of built-in methods that you can use on strings, and we can call it by following the variable with a dot. We will dive deep into some of these methods later. For now, let's go back to our previous example. We said that we did not want to manually count the index of a character. When that's the case, we can use a string method, index, to get the index of the wrong character. So the index method returns the index of the given substring inside the string. The substring that we pass can be as long or as short as we want. The result will be the index of the first character of that substring. What if there's more than one character in the string? Here, we know there are 3 n characters, but we only get one value. That's because the index method returns just the first position that matches. And what happens if the string doesn't have the substring we're looking for? The index method can't return a number because the substring isn't there, so we get a value error instead. Is there a way to know if a substring is contained in a string to avoid the error? Let's check this out. We can use the keyword in to check if a substring is contained in a string. We came across the keyword in when using for loops. In for loop, the in was used for iteration. In this case, the in is a condition that can be either true or false. It'll be true if the substring is part of the string, and false if it's not. All right, we just covered a bunch of new things. Let's put all the stuff together to solve a real-world problem. Imagine that your company has recently moved to using a new domain. But a lot of the company email addresses are still using the old one. You want to write a program that replaces this old domain with the new one in any outdated email addresses. Let's work on this together. First, let's define a function called updateDomain. This function receives emails from the company database. For any email that passes to our function, we first need to check if the old domain still exists in that email. If yes, we need to return a new email with updated domain eventually. Because you call a variable old_domain, you need to initialize it before that. In case you wanted to reuse this function in the future for any other domains, let's initialize this variable by passing that parameter to our function instead. Back to our function, let's complete the logic. We know an email is divided by the @ sign. Let's locate the @ sign. For the new email, we will keep the content before the @ sign, which means we take everything from the start to the @ sign, including the @ sign. And the content after the @ sign will be replaced by new domain. Finally, we return the new email as we already stated before. In case the email is already updated to new domain, this condition is false. We can just return that email at the end of our function. It works perfectly. Don't worry if you're finding it a bit tricky. Take your time to digest the new knowledge. If there's a specific part that's tripping you up, leave the comment to us, or join the social learning group to discuss with other learners. You may even find that someone has asked and got the answer to the same question already. When you feel ready, let's move on to learn a lot more handy string methods. Now, we'll show you how to use some of these methods. Remember, the goal is not for you to memorize all of this. Instead, we want to give you an idea of what you can do with strings in Python. Some string methods let you perform transformations or formatting on the string text, like upper, and its opposite, lower. These methods are really useful when you're handling user input. Let's say you wanted to check if the user keyed in the correct email. Chances are, if the user uses their phone to type in the email, the first character is capitalized by default. How would you check if the user typed it using upper or lower case? You don't need to, you just transform the answer to the case you want. Like this example. Another useful method when dealing with user input is the strip method. This method will get rid of surrounding spaces in the string. If we ask the user for an answer, we usually don't care about any surrounding spaces. So it's a good idea to use the strip method to get rid of any white space. This means that strip doesn't just remove spaces, it also removes tabs and new line characters, which are all characters we don't usually want in user-provided strings. There are two more versions of this method, lstrip and rstrip, to get rid of the whitespace characters just to the left or to the right of the string, instead of both sides. Other methods give you information about the string itself. The method count returns how many times a given substring appears within a string. The method endsWith returns whether the string ends with a certain substring. And the method startsWith does the opposite. The method isNumeric returns whether the string's made up of just numbers. Adding to that, if we have a string that is numeric, we can use the int function to convert it to an actual number. In earlier videos, we showed that we can concatenate strings using the plus sign. The join method can also be used for concatenating. To use the join method, we have to call it on the string that'll be used for joining. In this case, we're using a string with a space in it. The method receives a list of strings, and returns one string, with each of the strings joined by the initial string. Let's check out another example. We can also split a string into a list of strings. The split method returns a list of all the words in the initial string, and it automatically splits by any whitespace. It can optionally take a parameter and split the strings by another character, like a dash or dots. Now let's try something more practical. Let's use replace method to update a company email from its old domain to the new one. This method takes two arguments. First, it takes what we want to replace, which is the old domain. Then, the comma, followed by the new domain we wanted to update into. Okay, so we've just learned a bunch of new methods. But there are tons more methods that you can use on strings. And how do you get to know all of them? One way is to search on the documentation. But let me show you a trick to quickly go through all these methods. To see what string methods are available out there, you can use dir function and pass in the str object as an argument. So you got all the string methods here. Let's see how many methods we have. Around 78. Did you remember we told you not to worry about trying to memorize all these methods? It's because we have another trick for you. Whenever you wanted to look up a specific method, you can use the help function and pass in this argument str.the method. The instruction on how to use the method will quickly appear in your code editor. Alright, last up, we're going to check out how to format strings. Up to now, we've been making strings using the plus sign to just concatenate the parts of the string we wanted to create. And we've used the street function to convert numbers into strings, so that we can concatenate them, too. This works, but there's a better way to do this, using the format method. Let's see a couple of examples. In this example, we have two variables, name and age. We generate a string that has those variables in it by using the curly brackets placeholder to show where the variables should be written. We then pass the variables as a parameter to the format method. You can see how it doesn't matter that name is a string and number is an integer. The format method deals with that, so we don't have to. The curly brackets are not always empty. By using certain expressions inside those brackets, we can take advantage of the format expression. One of the things we can put inside the curly brackets is the name of the variable we want in that position, to make the whole string more readable. This is particularly relevant when the text can get rewritten or translated, and the variables might switch places. In our earlier example, we could rewrite the message to make the variables appear in a different order. In that case, we'd need to pass the parameters to format in a slightly different way, because we're using placeholders with variable names. The order in which the variables are passed to the format function doesn't matter. But for this to work, we need to set the names we're going to use, and assign a value to them, inside the parameters to format. Finally, if you are using Python 3.6 and above, you will have access to what we call the F string. To turn the string format into an F string, we can simply add the letter F at the beginning and outside of our string. Then, we write the variable directly within the placeholder, and we can get rid of the format method. You can even perform any operation inside the placeholder. For example, if you wanted the name to be uppercase, we can apply the upper method to our string directly within the placeholder. There's a ton more formatting options you can use when you need them. But don't worry about learning them all at once, just memorize what you are most comfortable with, and we'll explain any others as they come along. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and comment if you find this video useful. And subscribe for more future videos.